The hum of the server in the basement office was usually a comforting sound, a low thrum of orderly processing. For Ethan, an engineer who built systems that were supposed to be reliable, it was the sound of his digital life, neatly archived and backed up. Today, however, that orderly hum felt like a prelude to chaos. He was finally tackling years of accumulated digital detritus, migrating old emails and documents to a new cloud storage system. It was a tedious task, filled with forgotten projects, old photos, and digital ghosts of a life lived. He clicked into a folder labeled Olivia, College Years, expecting blurry photos from parties and maybe some sappy messages between young lovers. Olivia, his wife, 44 years old, just a year older than his own 45. 25 years together, 20 years married this summer. High school sweethearts. She was the senior, he the junior, a classic trope they'd laughed about for decades. Their story, their solid, unwavering story. He scrolled through the folder. Photos first, grainy shots of Olivia and her roommates in a dorm room, group pictures at campus events. Then, emails. He started casually reading, a nostalgic smile on his face. Messages between Olivia and her mom, planning visits, notes about classes, and then threads with names he vaguely recognized from college visits. Mark, Dave, Chris. Friends she'd introduced them as, guys she hung out with in her hall or classes. The tone in these emails was different, though. More casual, more flirtatious. His pragmatic mind, trained to spot anomalies in datasets, flagged this immediately. He clicked on a thread with Mark. The subject line was innocuous, something about a study group. But the content, his breath hitched. Inside jokes he wasn't privy to, references to late nights that sounded less about studying and more about something else. He saw mentions of him, Ethan, but in a way that felt compartmentalized, like a separate life she kept neatly tucked away. Ethan's visiting this weekend, got to keep things low-key, followed by plans to meet Mark after Ethan left. A cold dread began to pool in his stomach, a heavy, unfamiliar weight. He clicked on another thread, then another. Dave. Chris. The pattern was undeniable. Messages detailing nights spent together, explicit descriptions that left no room for misinterpretation. References to other guys too, names he didn't even recognize, but the context was clear. Last night with Tom was wild, one message read. Hooked up with that guy from the party, read another. These weren't just friends. These were encounters. Multiple encounters. During the first 2 years of her college, when he was still in high school and then community college, 3 hours away, visiting her a couple of weekends a month. The years they were long distance. The years they had explicitly talked about staying faithful, about how difficult it would be, but how committed they were. He felt his carefully constructed reality begin to fracture. 20 years. 20 years of marriage, built on a foundation he believed was solid, built on the narrative of high school sweethearts who weathered the long distance and came out stronger. Now, the foundation was crumbling, revealing a hidden history he never suspected. He scrolled further, looking at dates. These weren't isolated incidents. They spanned those 2 years. The sheer volume was staggering. 10? More? The original story mentioned at least 10. Looking at these emails, it felt like an endless stream of deceit, woven into the fabric of their early relationship. He found emails where she talked about him coming to visit, planning their weekends together, sometimes right after or before messages detailing intimate encounters with other men. The cognitive dissonance was jarring. How could she compartmentalize like that? How could she look him in the eye, share those weekends with him, all while living this other life he knew nothing about? The cold dread turned into a slow burn of anger, betrayal. Not just the act of infidelity, but the deceit. The active hiding, the carefully constructed facade that had lasted for 2 decades. He thought back to those college visits, meeting her friends. Were these the guys she was with? Had he shaken their hands, shared a laugh with them? The thought made his skin crawl. He remembered meeting Mark and Dave at parties, casual introductions. Had they known about him? Had they been in on the lie? He closed the laptop, the screen reflecting his own stunned, hollow face. The hum of the server now sounded mocking, the sound of a system running perfectly while built on corrupted data. His life, his marriage, the story he told himself for 20 years, it all felt like a lie. And the woman upstairs, the woman he shared his life with, the mother of his children, had been keeping this secret for 2 decades. He went upstairs, the printed emails clutched in his hand like damning evidence. Olivia was in the living room, reading. The house was quiet, the boys were out with friends, a normal evening in their normal life. But nothing felt normal anymore. "Olivia," he said, his voice raspy. She looked up, a smile on her face that faltered when she saw his expression and the papers in his hand. "Ethan? What is it? You look pale." He held out the emails. "What is this?" Her eyes widened, scanning the first page. The colour drained from her face. Where did you get these?" "Old files. I was cleaning up the server," he said, his voice trembling slightly despite his effort to keep it steady. "What is this, Olivia? Mark, Dave, Chris, all these names, all these messages from when we were together, when we were long distance, when you said we were committed." She stood up, her hands fluttering nervously. "Ethan, I can't explain." "Explain what?" he demanded, the anger rising, hot and sharp. "Explain sleeping with multiple men while telling me you loved me, while planning our future?" It wasn't like that," she stammered. "It was college. It was long distance. Things were different." "Different how?" he pressed. "We talked about being exclusive. You got upset when I even considered going to prom with a friend." "That was high school. College was wilder. We were apart," she said, her voice gaining a defensive edge. "I didn't think we'd last. It was just physical stuff. It didn't mean anything." "It didn't mean anything." The words felt like a physical blow. "It meant you lied to me for 20 years. It meant our entire relationship started with a lie." "Don't be dramatic, Ethan," she said, her tone shifting from defensive to dismissive. "It happened 2 decades ago, before we were married, practically. We were kids. We were dating. We were committed," he shouted, unable to hold back the volume now. "And you introduced me to some of them as friends. You kept in touch with them." "Ben Carter is married to Sarah. He's a mutual friend," she retorted, bringing up a name he hadn't even processed yet from the emails. "Ben, the guy who married Sarah, their college friend? The one he'd seen at countless parties, even their big East Coast celebration? The one she was still in contact with?" The depth of the deception was a bottomless pit. "You slept with Ben Carter?" he asked, his voice dropping to a stunned whisper. She flinched. "It was years ago, Ethan. It didn't matter." "It matters now," he roared. "It matters that you built our life on a lie. It matters that you let me meet these men, socialize with them, all while knowing what you did." "You're overreacting," she said, her chin lifting defensively, the first signs of gaslighting appearing. "It was just college. A few mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, especially in long-distance relationships. It's practically normal." "Normal?" The word hung in the air, absurd and offensive. "Normal? Lying to your partner, sleeping with 10+ people, introducing them to your boyfriend and keeping it a secret for 20 years was normal?" His pragmatic mind rejected the premise entirely. "No, Olivia," he said, shaking his head. "That is not normal. That is betrayal. That is deceit, and you hid it for 20 years. So you're going to throw away our entire marriage? 20 years? Our family? Over something that happened when we were kids?" She challenged, her voice rising, starting to sound like the victim. "Over 20 years of lies," he corrected her. "Over a complete breach of trust that I just discovered. How am I supposed to trust you now? How am I supposed to look at you?" She started to cry, but the tears felt performative, a tactic. "Ethan, please. We can get past this. It was so long ago." "I can't," he said, the weight in his chest unbearable. "I can't pretend this didn't happen. I can't unsee the emails. I can't unfeel this betrayal." He knew with a chilling certainty that his marriage was over. The foundation was gone. "I need space," he said, turning towards the front door. "I can't be here right now." "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice panicked. "To Sarah's," he said, "his sister, his rock. He needed her. He needed someone who wouldn't tell him he was overreacting." He walked out the door, leaving his wife standing in the living room of the house they had built together, the house that now felt like a monument to a lie. The Seattle rain had started, a soft, persistent drizzle that mirrored the quiet, unending ache that had settled in his chest. He got into his car, the familiar scent of leather and coffee doing little to ground him. He drove towards the city, towards Sarah's apartment, leaving behind the shattered pieces of his life. The server hummed on in the basement, processing data that no longer made any sense. Sarah lived in a cozy apartment in Capitol Hill, the kind of place with exposed brick and a view of the city lights. She was surprised to see him on her doorstep, soaked and looking like he'd seen a ghost. As soon as he stepped inside, the dam broke. He didn't shout, didn't rage. He just sat on her sofa, the printed emails still damp in his hand, and recounted everything in a low, steady voice, punctuated by moments where his voice cracked or he had to pause to breathe. Sarah listened, her expression moving from confusion to shock to quiet anger. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. When he finished, the silence was heavy, broken only by the distant city sounds filtering through the window. "Oh, Ethan," she said softly, sitting beside him and taking his hand. "I am so sorry." That simple validation, so different from Olivia's dismissiveness, brought a fresh wave of emotion. Tears he hadn't realized he was holding back finally fell. He wasn't just crying for the betrayal, but for the loss of the life he thought he had, for the years lived in ignorance, for the painful dismantling that was about to begin. "She said it was normal," he choked out, the absurdity of it still stinging. "Normal for long distance, that I'm overreacting." Sarah squeezed his hand. "That's gaslighting, Ethan, trying to make you doubt your own valid feelings and reality. It's not normal. It wasn't normal then, and it's definitely not normal now. What she did was a profound betrayal of trust. Hiding it for 20 years, that's a whole other level." Her words were a lifeline. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't overreacting. His feelings were valid. The simple truth of it was a fragile comfort in the face of such overwhelming pain. He stayed at Sarah's that night, sleeping fitfully on her sofa, the images from the emails flashing behind his eyelids. The next day was a blur of phone calls. He called a lawyer Sarah recommended, a calm, experienced woman named Miss Chen. He explained the situation, the decades-old infidelity, the recent discovery, the wife's reaction. Miss Chen listened patiently, confirming that while the acts were old, the deceit was current, and the breakdown of trust was a valid ground for divorce. He also had difficult conversations with his sons. Mark, home from college for a few days, took the news with a quiet, analytical approach, asking questions about timelines and what this meant legally. Alex, still in high school, was more visibly upset, withdrawn and quiet. Ethan kept the details limited, telling them that he and their mother had discovered some difficult truths about decisions made early in their relationship that had created a fundamental break in trust they couldn't repair. He didn't reveal the extent of the infidelity or the gaslighting, wanting to protect them from the uglier details. He emphasized that this was about his and Olivia's relationship, not their family unit, and that he and Olivia were both committed to being their parents and navigating this as best they could. Over the next few days, he had more conversations with Olivia. They were tense, fraught with her continued attempts to minimize, blame, and occasionally shift to pleading. "We can go to counseling," she offered, desperation creeping into her voice when she realized he wasn't backing down. "We can work through this." He hesitated. Part of him, the part that clung to the 20 years, wanted to believe that was possible. But the other part, the part that had seen the emails and heard her dismissive justifications, knew the trust was gone. The fact that she only suggested counseling when faced with the reality of divorce felt calculated, not genuine remorse. "Maybe counseling," he conceded, "but I don't think it's to save the marriage, Olivia. I think it's to figure out how to end it respectfully and co-parent." She agreed, seemingly relieved at the temporary reprieve, still perhaps hoping she could sway him. They scheduled a session with Dr. Ramirez, a therapist specializing in couples in crisis. The first few therapy sessions were brutal. Olivia, initially contrite, quickly reverted to her defensive posture. She admitted to the physical encounters but continued to downplay them, calling them meaningless flings during a difficult long-distance period. She argued that he was being unreasonable for holding on to something that happened so long ago. Dr. Ramirez, calm and steady, guided the conversation, gently challenging Olivia's minimization and validating Ethan's feelings of betrayal and the impact of the decades of deceit. "Olivia," Dr. Ramirez said gently in one session, "Ethan isn't just reacting to something that happened 20 years ago. He's reacting to the discovery of a fundamental lie that underpinned your entire relationship. He's reacting to the fact that you kept this secret for 2 decades. And he's reacting to your current difficulty in acknowledging the depth of hurt this has caused him. Olivia bristled. But it was just physical. It wasn't like I was in love with them. The nature of the relationship isn't the point, Olivia, Ethan said, his voice weary. The point is, we were exclusive. We agreed to be faithful. You broke that agreement repeatedly and then hid it for 20 years. You were so focused on school. You didn't understand what I was going through, being away from home for the first time, all the freedom. She started, attempting to shift blame. That doesn't excuse lying and cheating, Ethan cut her off. And it doesn't excuse hiding it for 20 years. And it doesn't excuse telling me I'm overreacting now. The gaslighting continued outside of therapy too. Conversations at home were strained. Olivia would swing between moments of tearful apology and frustrated outbursts where she accused him of dwelling on the past and ruining their family. She'd repeat the line about LDRs being different, about everyone making mistakes. The pressure from family intensified. Aunt Carol called almost daily. "Ethan, your mother told me what's going on." Aunt Carol's voice was laced with disapproval. "You can't divorce Olivia. Not after all these years. What about the boys? What will people think? It was just college silliness. She was young. You need to forgive her. Marriage is sacred." "Aunt Carol, she lied to me for 20 years, Ethan said, trying to keep his voice even. "That's not college silliness. That's a fundamental breach of trust." "But you had a good marriage. 20 years of good times," she insisted, ignoring his point. "You can't throw away all the good because of a few old mistakes." "It's not a few old mistakes, Aunt Carol. It's 20 years of deceit," he repeated, feeling increasingly isolated. It seemed no one understood or wanted to understand that the issue wasn't just the infidelity itself, but the lie that had become the foundation of their life. He continued therapy, processing the layers of betrayal and the insidious effects of the gaslighting. Dr. Ramirez helped him see that Olivia's inability to truly acknowledge the impact of her actions was a key factor. Her focus was on her own discomfort or the consequences she faced, not on the pain she had inflicted. Then came the second wave of discovery, the turning point that solidified his decision. It wasn't in old files this time, but in the present. Current part characters, 4,000. Total characters, 8,000. He noticed Olivia being unusually secretive with her phone. She'd take it with her everywhere, even to the bathroom, things she hadn't done before. His engineer's mind, now hyper-attuned to anomalies and inconsistencies, registered this change in behavior. He initially dismissed it. Maybe she was just stressed about the divorce discussions. But the feeling persisted. One evening, she left her work laptop open on the kitchen counter while she went to get something from the basement. A notification popped up on the screen. A chat message. His eyes, against his better judgment, flicked to it. It was from a co-worker, someone named David. The message was innocuous enough, something about a project deadline. But as he glanced at the open chat window, he saw the preceding messages. Flirtatious banter, inside jokes, references to drinks after work. It wasn't definitive proof of physical infidelity, but it was undeniable evidence of inappropriate emotional closeness and boundary crossing. He scrolled up, a knot tightening in his stomach. He saw a message from David referencing our date last week. Date? Olivia had mentioned going out with co-workers occasionally, group things. But a date? When Olivia returned, he was standing by the laptop, his face grim. "Who is David?" She froze, her eyes darting to the screen. "He's a co-worker." "And you went on a date with him?" Her face paled. "It wasn't a date, not really, just drinks after work." "He called it a date," Ethan said, pointing to the screen. "And these messages, this isn't just work talk, Olivia. This is flirting. This is crossing lines." "It didn't mean anything," she insisted, the familiar dismissiveness returning, but laced with panic this time. "It was just a distraction. Things have been so hard with us." A distraction? He felt a cold calm settle over him, a clarity that cut through the confusion and pain. This wasn't just about 20 years ago. This was a pattern. A willingness to deceive, to seek validation or excitement outside the relationship, even now, while they were supposedly in therapy, trying to navigate the end of their marriage. "After everything," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "after discovering the truth about college, After all the pain, all the gaslighting, you're still doing this? You're still blurring lines and being secretive? Nothing happened, Ethan. We just had drinks, she pleaded. It's not just about whether you slept with him, Olivia, he said. It's about the willingness to go there. It's about the continued lack of respect for our relationship, even in its final stages. It's about the fact that you haven't changed. You're still the same person who compartmentalized and deceived. In that moment, any lingering doubt vanished. There was no path forward. This wasn't a single historical mistake. This was who she was, or at least a deeply ingrained pattern of behavior she hadn't confronted or changed. The trust wasn't just broken. It was fundamentally impossible to rebuild with someone who continued to operate this way. It's over, Olivia, he said, the words heavy with finality. Completely over. The divorce is happening. There's no point in counseling to save anything anymore. We'll continue for co-parenting maybe, but that's it. She started to cry, real tears this time, tears of loss and perhaps regret, but it was too late. The dam of his hope had broken completely. He had reached his limit. He contacted Miss Chen the next day. I'm ready, he told her. No more hesitation. Let's move forward with the divorce. Miss Chen was efficient and professional. She drafted the initial paperwork, the petition for dissolution of marriage, citing irreconcilable differences. The state of Washington has a mandatory 90-day waiting period after filing before a divorce can be finalized, a period meant for reflection or reconciliation. For Ethan, it felt less like a waiting period and more like a necessary, albeit painful, transition. He moved out of the master bedroom that night, setting up a temporary space in the guest room. The house felt vast and empty, filled with the ghosts of a life that was never quite what he thought it was. Telling the boys again, this time with the firm declaration that divorce was happening, was difficult. They sat them down together. Olivia was subdued, tearful. Ethan was calm, resolute. We've decided to get a divorce, Ethan said, his voice gentle. It's a difficult decision, but it's the right one for us. Mark nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Alex's eyes welled up immediately. Why? Alex asked, his voice small. It's because of things that happened a long, long time ago, Olivia said, her voice thick with emotion. Decisions we made when we were young that we haven't been able to move past. Mark, ever the pragmatist, looked at Ethan. Dad, when you guys were long distance, when Mom was at college, were you ever with anyone else? The question hung in the air. It was a logical question, given the context of LDRs, but it was directed at him, the one who had been faithful. He saw Olivia flinch slightly. He looked at Mark, then at Alex. He had decided not to share the full, ugly truth with them, not the extent of the infidelity, not the gaslighting. But in this moment, faced with his son's direct question and seeing Olivia's discomfort, he felt a pang of something, a need for honesty perhaps, or a quiet assertion of his own integrity. But before he could answer, Olivia spoke. No, Mark, she said, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze fixed on her hands. Your dad, he was always faithful. It was me. I was the one I made mistakes back then. It was a small admission, a fraction of the truth, but it was the most direct acknowledgement she had made to the boys. Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that the truth, in some form, was out there, and that he hadn't had to defend his own fidelity. Sadness that this was the legacy they were leaving their children. A mother's betrayal, a father's heartbreak, and a family fractured by decades of lies. They continued the conversation, focusing on reassuring the boys that they were loved, that this wasn't their fault, and that both parents would be there for them. Ethan mentioned they would be working with a mediator to make the process as smooth as possible, and that they were continuing counseling to help them navigate co-parenting effectively. He also made it clear that he supported them talking about their feelings with him, Olivia, a therapist, or anyone they trusted. Alex remained quiet, withdrawn. Mark seemed to be processing it internally. The next few months were a strange limbo. Living in the same house, but separate, navigating shared spaces, awkward silences, and scheduled discussions about finances and logistics. They began meeting with a mediator, a neutral third party to help them divide assets and create a parenting plan for Alex, who was still a minor. Financially, they were stable. Both had good careers. Ethan as an engineer, Olivia in her field, let's say, marketing. They had savings, investments, and no major debts. The house in the suburbs of Seattle was their biggest asset. Ethan didn't feel attached to it anymore. It was tainted by the discovery. Olivia wanted to keep it. Current part characters, 4,000. Total characters, 12,000. During mediation sessions, the cold reality of dismantling their life became concrete, dividing retirement funds, splitting investments, valuing the house and negotiating a buyout. It was procedural, almost clinical, which was a strange contrast to the raw emotional pain that still simmered beneath the surface. One point of contention, albeit minor in the grand scheme, was the furniture and household items, 20 years of accumulated possessions. The mediator suggested they walk through the house and list who wanted what, or items they agreed to sell, and split the profits. It felt absurd, deciding who got the couch they bought together, the dining table where they'd shared countless meals. Olivia was surprisingly practical during these discussions, almost detached. It reinforced Ethan's growing suspicion that she was already mentally, if not physically, moving on. In one mediation session, discussing potential complications, the mediator mentioned that any new romantic relationships before the divorce was final could potentially complicate the amicable settlement, especially if financial entanglements arose. Olivia visibly bristled at this, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. It struck Ethan as deeply ironic, given the reason they were there in the first place. It also felt like a confirmation that she was indeed already dating. The most significant point of discussion regarding the children was Alex. At 17, he was nearing adulthood, but legally still a minor requiring a formal parenting plan. Alex had become increasingly withdrawn from Olivia since they announced the divorce. He spent more time in his room or out with friends, and when he was home, he gravitated towards Ethan. His relationship with his mother seemed strained, marked by short, tense exchanges or avoidance. When it came time to formalize the parenting plan, Alex was clear. He wanted to live primarily with Ethan. He expressed this preference directly to the mediator and later in a difficult conversation with Olivia. "Mom," Alex said, his voice hesitant but firm, "I think I need to live with Dad right now." Olivia's face fell. "But why, sweetie? Is it because of all this?" "Partly," Alex admitted. "Things just feel different. I don't know. I need some space, I think. And I feel more, comfortable at Dad's." Ethan saw the hurt in Olivia's eyes, and a part of him felt a pang of sympathy for her. Regardless of her past actions, she was still his mother, and this was clearly painful for her. However, he also understood Alex's need for stability and emotional safety in the midst of the upheaval. He had worked hard to be a steady presence for his sons, and Alex's choice, while difficult for Olivia, validated that effort. Olivia initially resisted, threatening to contest the parenting plan and potentially the amicable divorce. The idea of a contested divorce, dragging things out, potentially involving the children more deeply, filled Ethan with dread. But Alex, sensing his mother's resistance, took a stronger stance. "Mom, if you make this hard," Alex said, his voice gaining a surprising edge, "if you force me to live somewhere I don't want to be right now. I'll just wait until I'm 18 in a few months, and then I won't come around at all. I need you to understand that I need this." It was a harsh ultimatum from a teenager, born out of pain and confusion, but it hit home. Olivia backed down. She agreed to the parenting plan, stipulating that Alex would reside primarily with Ethan until he turned 18 later that year. Ethan privately encouraged Alex to keep the lines of communication open with his mother, reminding him that despite everything, she loved him. Over time, he did see glimmers of reconciliation, small steps towards rebuilding their bond. The divorce moved forward. Miss Chen and Olivia's lawyer worked through the details with the mediator's help. They divided the assets mostly 50-50. Olivia kept the house and most of the furniture, taking out a mortgage to pay Ethan his share of the equity and the estimated value of the furnishings. They each kept their cars, and personal belongings were divided without much fuss. Anything truly difficult to split, like certain pieces of art or electronics, they agreed to sell and split the proceeds. The process was smoother than it could have been, thanks to their relative financial stability and the fact that the most contentious issue, Alex's custody, was resolved by Alex himself. During this time, Ethan continued his solo therapy sessions with Dr. Ramirez. These sessions were invaluable. He processed the layers of betrayal, the anger, the sadness, the confusion. He explored the impact of the gaslighting, learning to trust his own perceptions and feelings again. He grieved the loss of the marriage, not just the future he thought he had, but the idealized past that had been shattered. Dr. Ramirez helped him understand that his reaction wasn't an overreaction to a small mistake, but a healthy response to a significant trauma and a profound breach of trust. He also continued couples counseling with Olivia, but the focus had shifted entirely to co-parenting. These sessions were less about emotional processing of the past and more about practical communication strategies for raising their sons separately. They were civil, often detached, discussing schedules, finances related to the boys, and strategies for presenting a united front on key issues. These sessions, while helpful for establishing a working relationship, also confirmed the emotional distance between them. Olivia often seemed distracted, eager to end the sessions. One afternoon, leaving a co-parenting session, Ethan saw Olivia get into a car waiting outside. The driver was a man. He looked familiar. It was David, the co-worker from the chat messages. Olivia had claimed nothing happened, just drinks. Maybe. But seeing him there, waiting for her after a therapy session about the end of their marriage, spoke volumes. It didn't sting as much as he might have expected. It simply confirmed what he already suspected. She had moved on, or was well on her way. And seeing that strangely made him feel more ready to move on himself. The divorce was finalized a few weeks later. A judge signed the papers. It was done. 20 years of marriage ended in a few strokes of a pen. It felt anticlimactic, yet profoundly significant. He wasn't just divorced. He was free from the weight of the secret, free from the gaslighting, free to build a life based on truth. He found a new place, a modern townhome in a different part of Seattle, closer to the city but still quiet. It felt clean, new, unburdened by history. Moving in was cathartic. He set up his office, his bedroom, a comfortable space for the boys. He bought a high-quality woodworking bench, something he'd always wanted but never made space for in the old house. It felt symbolic, building something tangible, something real, with his own hands, a contrast to the foundation of lies his marriage had been built upon. In a moment of impulsive, midlife crisis-adjacent joy, he traded in his sensible minivan. Not for a sports car, fitting his pragmatic nature, but for a sleek, comfortable electric sedan, something modern, efficient, and quiet. A representation of a cleaner, quieter future. His relationship with his sons remained strong. Mark was navigating college life, but they talked regularly. Alex settled into a routine at Ethan's new place, his relationship with Olivia slowly improving with time and space. Ethan continued to encourage it, knowing how important their mother was, despite everything. At work, life continued. He was good at his job, finding solace in the logical world of engineering. One day, a woman from a different department, Chloe, stopped by his desk. He knew her casually. Smart, funny, always seemed to be smiling. "Hey, Ethan," she said. "I know this might be out of the blue, but I was wondering if you'd be interested in grabbing coffee sometime, outside of work." He was surprised. And pleased. He hadn't thought about dating at all. His life had been consumed by the divorce, the pain, the healing. "Chloe, that's really kind," he said, a genuine smile forming. "I'd like that. I've recently finalized my divorce, and I'm still very much processing everything. I'm not sure I'm ready to date just yet." She smiled warmly. "I completely understand. No pressure at all. Just wanted to put it out there. Take your time. The offer stands whenever you feel ready. Seriously. No expiration date." Her understanding and kindness were a balm. It wasn't a date, not yet, but it was a sign. A sign that there was a future, a possibility of connection built on honesty and respect. A future where he didn't have to live with secrets, where he could be seen for who he was, and where trust wasn't a fragile facade. The past year had been the hardest of his life. He had shed more tears, felt more pain, and questioned his reality more profoundly than he ever thought possible. But standing in his new home, watching the Seattle skyline, feeling the solid wood of his new workbench under his hand, he knew he had made the right choice. He had chosen truth over comfort, integrity over deceit, and his own well-being over maintaining a beautiful lie. The scars remained, a permanent reminder of the betrayal, but they were healing. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt genuinely good about himself, ready to build something new, something real. The healing process wasn't linear. There were still days when the anger would flare, or the sadness would wash over him unexpectedly. Memories of shared moments, once cherished, would surface, now tainted by the knowledge of the hidden past. He'd remember a specific trip, a family dinner, a quiet evening at home, and the thought would strike him. She knew. All that time she knew. And he hadn't. The weight of that ignorance was still heavy at times. Therapy continued to be his anchor. Dr. Ramirez helped him navigate these waves of emotion, validating the complexity of grieving a marriage that was both real in its shared history and fundamentally flawed in its foundation. He worked on rebuilding his identity, not just as a divorced man, but as Ethan, separate from the narrative of his marriage. He reconnected with old hobbies he'd let slide, hiking in the Cascades, exploring Seattle's neighborhoods, reading more fiction. These simple acts of reclaiming his time and interests were surprisingly powerful steps in his healing journey. His relationship with Sarah deepened. She remained a constant source of support, listening without judgment, offering practical help, and reminding him of his strength when he doubted himself. Her validation was a crucial counterpoint to the gaslighting he had endured. Mark and Alex were adjusting. Mark, in college, seemed to find it easier to compartmentalize, focusing on his own life while maintaining relationships with both parents. Alex's adjustment was more visible. Living primarily with Ethan provided him with the stability he needed, and his relationship with Olivia, while still having moments of tension, was slowly improving through their co-parenting interactions and Ethan's encouragement. Ethan made sure Alex knew that his feelings were valid, whatever they were, and that he didn't have to choose sides. He saw Alex start to open up more, talking about his feelings about the divorce and the changes in his family dynamic. Co-parenting with Olivia remained civil, dictated by the need to provide a stable environment for Alex. Their joint therapy sessions, focused on practical co-parenting strategies, were businesslike. They discussed schedules, finances related to the boys, college expenses looming for Mark, Alex's activities, and coordinating on things like school events or medical appointments. The emotional distance between them was palpable, a stark contrast to the intertwined lives they had shared for 2 decades. There was no lingering romantic tension, no deep emotional connection. It was a functional partnership for the sake of their children, built on the ruins of their marriage. Ethan sometimes saw glimpses of Olivia's life post-divorce. Through mutual acquaintances or social media, he had unfollowed her, but news travels, he knew she was dating the co-worker, David. It didn't evoke jealousy or intense pain anymore. It just felt like confirmation. Confirmation that she had been ready to move on. Confirmation that her pattern of seeking connection outside the marriage continued, and confirmation that his decision to end things was necessary for his own peace. He thought about Ben Carter, the man who married their mutual friend, Sarah, not his sister Sarah, but a different friend from college. He had spoken to Ben briefly after the initial discovery. Ben had been genuinely surprised, claiming he had no idea Olivia was seriously dating Ethan back then. He had apologized for any unwitting role he played, and, as the original story mentioned, had blocked Olivia out of respect for Ethan. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. It showed a level of respect and accountability that Olivia still struggled with. As the months passed, the sharp edges of the pain began to soften. The constant hum of anxiety that had lived in his chest for so long started to dissipate. He wasn't defined by the betrayal anymore, but by his resilience, his integrity, and his commitment to building a new, authentic life. He started thinking about Chloe more often. Her kind smile, her easy conversation, her understanding offer of a rain check. He wasn't rushing into anything, but the idea of a potential connection with someone new, someone who represented honesty and a fresh start, was a comforting thought. He knew that building trust again would be a process, perhaps a long one, but he felt ready to consider it. One rainy Saturday in Seattle, while working in his new woodworking shop, the scent of sawdust filling the air, he paused. He looked around the space, at the tools neatly organized, at the project taking shape on the bench. This was real. This was his. It wasn't built on a lie. He thought about the life he had dismantled, the pain it had caused, the people who had pressured him to stay. He remembered the feeling of being gaslighted, of doubting his own reality. He had stood firm. He had chosen himself. He picked up a piece of wood, smooth and solid. There was a quiet strength in his hands now, a different kind of strength than the one he used to build systems or structures. It was the strength of having faced a devastating truth, survived the fallout, and begun to rebuild from the ground up. He knew the journey wasn't entirely over. Co-parenting would continue, holidays would require careful navigation, and the memories would still surface from time to time. But the crisis was past. The intense phase of pain and confusion had given way to a steady process of healing and rebuilding. He thought about the message he had learned, the absolute necessity of honesty, even when it's difficult. The corrosive power of deceit, not just on the betrayed, but on the betrayer, trapping them in a web of lies. The importance of trusting your own gut, your own feelings, even when others try to tell you you're wrong, and the quiet power of choosing self-respect and integrity above all else. He had lost his marriage, the central relationship of his adult life, but he had found something invaluable in the process: himself. A self that was stronger, more authentic, and finally, truly free. He finished sanding the piece of wood, feeling its smooth surface under his fingertips. It was a small piece of a larger project, a step in a process. Just like his life. A step, a process, building something new, solid, and true. The rain outside continued, a familiar Seattle soundtrack, but inside, in his new space, there was a sense of peace. He thought about Chloe's offer. Maybe soon. Maybe very soon. The weeks turned into months. Alex adjusted well to living primarily with Ethan. He seemed more relaxed, more like himself. He still saw his mother regularly, and their relationship was slowly finding a new rhythm, less strained than during the initial shock of the divorce. Ethan continued to facilitate this, understanding that his sons needed both parents, even if the parental unit itself was broken. Mark was thriving at college, visiting when he could, his pragmatic nature helping him navigate the changes with less overt emotional turmoil than Alex. Co-parenting sessions with Olivia continued, becoming more infrequent as they established routines and communication methods. They used a shared calendar app for Alex's schedule and mostly communicated via text or email regarding logistics. The in-person sessions with Dr. Ramirez were now primarily check-ins, ensuring they maintained a civil and functional co-parenting relationship. There was no pretense of friendship or lingering affection. It was a business relationship, focused on the shared task of raising their sons. Olivia remained guarded, rarely initiating personal conversation, and Ethan didn't push it. The need for closure on the marriage itself had been met through his individual therapy and the finality of the divorce. Ethan's own healing progressed steadily. The raw pain had faded, replaced by a dull ache that surfaced less and less often. He felt a growing sense of peace and contentment in his new life. His townhome felt truly like home. He enjoyed the simplicity, the lack of shared history in the walls. He spent evenings working on woodworking projects, the focus and tangible results, a welcome contrast to the intangible, messy, emotional work he had been doing. He had coffee with Chloe. It wasn't a date, not officially, but it felt like one. They talked easily, discovering shared interests beyond work. She was funny, intelligent, and kind. There was no pretense, no hidden layers. It was refreshing, a stark contrast to the decades of subtle and not-so-subtle deception he had lived with. He found himself smiling more genuinely than he had in years. They agreed to do it again. The pressure from family had mostly subsided. Aunt Carol eventually accepted the reality of the divorce, though she still occasionally made passive-aggressive comments about the sanctity of marriage. Ethan had learned to let it roll off his back. His focus was on his own well-being and his son's, not on managing other people's opinions or discomfort. He thought about the roommate who had first hinted at the truth. He hadn't spoken to her since that night, but he was grateful for her courage, her willingness to disrupt the facade. It had been painful, but necessary. One evening, while helping Alex with a college application essay, the topic of relationships came up. Alex, now more open, talked about a friend who was struggling with trust after being lied to by a partner. "It's messed up, Dad," Alex said, looking up from his laptop. Like, how can you ever trust someone again after that? Ethan paused, choosing his words carefully. He still hadn't told the boys the full story, the extent of the infidelity, the gaslighting. He might someday when they were older and better equipped to handle it. For now, he focused on the principle. Trust is the most important thing in any relationship, Alex, Ethan said. Romantic, friendship, family. It's the foundation, and when it's broken, especially by deliberate deceit, it's incredibly hard to rebuild. Sometimes it's impossible. Alex nodded slowly, absorbing his words. It's not about blame, necessarily, Ethan continued, thinking of Olivia, but about accountability, and about whether the person who broke the trust understands the gravity of what they did and is willing to truly work to earn it back. And sometimes, even if they are, the damage is too deep. He looked at his son, wanting to impart a lesson learned at great cost. You deserve to be in relationships where you feel safe, respected, and where there's honesty. Don't ever let anyone tell you that your feelings about being lied to are an overreaction. They're not. Alex met his gaze. Thanks, Dad. It was a small moment, but significant. He was teaching his sons the lessons he had learned the hard way. The importance of recognizing disrespect, the validity of their own feelings, the necessity of integrity. He continued to see Chloe for coffee dates. They were easy, natural, building a connection based on shared interests and open communication. They talked about their lives, their work, their families. He was honest about his divorce and his sons. There was no pressure, just a comfortable getting to know each other. It was a gentle reminder that life and the possibility of connection continued after heartbreak. He reflected on the past year, the shock, the pain, the fight for his own sanity against the gaslighting, the difficult process of dismantling his life. It had been a trial by fire, but he had emerged on the other side, scarred but stronger. He had learned that the longest marriage, the most stable-seeming life, could be built on a shaky foundation of secrets. He had learned that forgiveness was not mandatory, especially when accountability was absent. And he had learned the profound importance of self-respect and the courage it takes to walk away from a situation that compromises it. He was living a smaller life, in a smaller house, with a different rhythm. But it was a life that felt authentic, built on a foundation of truth, however painful that truth had been to uncover. The hum of his new electric car, quiet and efficient, felt like the right soundtrack for this new chapter. The scent of sawdust in his workshop was the smell of creating something real, and the possibility of a shared laugh over coffee with a kind, honest woman felt like a promise of genuine connection. He was healing. He was rebuilding. He was moving forward, one authentic step at a time. The past was a part of his story, a painful chapter, but it was no longer the whole book. The future stretched ahead, unknown but full of possibility, built on the solid ground of truth. As the one-year anniversary of the discovery approached, Ethan found himself reflecting more intensely on the journey. It felt like a lifetime ago that he had sat in his basement office, clicking through old digital files, unaware of the seismic shift that was about to occur in his world. The man who had meticulously organized those files, confident in the structure of his life, felt like a different person. The past year had stripped away layers of comfortable illusion, forcing him to confront not just his wife's deceit, but his own blind spots and the vulnerability that came with profound trust. He realized that for years he had perhaps been too comfortable, too trusting, too willing to believe the narrative they had built together. His pragmatic nature, so useful in engineering, had perhaps made him less attuned to emotional complexities and potential inconsistencies in his personal life. He had built his marriage like a sturdy bridge, meticulously designed and seemingly unshakable, without realizing that some of the foundational supports were rotten. The gaslighting, in particular, had left a deep mark. The experience of having his reality questioned, of being told his valid feelings were overreactions, or that accepted norms of fidelity were simply different for others, had been disorienting and damaging. It had forced him to rely on his own internal compass, to trust his gut and the objective evidence, the emails, the later chat messages, over the manipulative words designed to make him doubt himself. Dr. Ramirez had been crucial in helping him navigate this, providing an external validation that counteracted the internal chaos. Learning about gaslighting as a specific form of manipulation had been empowering. It gave a name to the insidious feeling of being made to feel crazy. He thought about Olivia. Their interactions remained civil, centered entirely around the boys. He saw her at school events, parent-teacher conferences, sometimes briefly when Alex was transitioning between homes. She seemed okay. She was still with David, the co-worker. Ethan felt no desire to reconnect with her on an emotional level, nor did he feel any lingering animosity. The anger had dissipated, replaced by a quiet indifference and a sense of closure. He hoped, for her sake and for the boys, that she had found some form of genuine happiness, but he no longer needed her validation or her remorse to move forward. His healing was his own responsibility. His relationship with Alex continued to strengthen. Alex was navigating the typical challenges of senior year: college applications, future plans, social dynamics. The divorce had been a difficult chapter for him, but he seemed to be finding his footing. He occasionally talked to Ethan about his feelings, expressing frustration or sadness about the changes, and Ethan simply listened, offering support and reassurance. He was proud of how Alex was handling it, showing a maturity beyond his years. Mark was coming home for the summer soon, and Ethan looked forward to having both boys under his roof. His townhome, while smaller than the old house, felt spacious enough for the three of them. It was a comfortable, relaxed environment, filled with open communication and mutual respect, the things that had been missing from the core of his marriage. He continued to see Chloe. Their coffee dates had evolved into actual dates, dinners, walks around Green Lake, visiting art exhibits. It was a slow, deliberate process of getting to know each other, free from the intensity and expectations of youth. He was open with her about his past, the divorce, and the reasons behind it. He didn't dwell on the pain, but he was honest about the experience and the lessons he had learned about trust and honesty. Chloe listened with empathy and understanding. She was building something with him, not on a foundation of shared history, but on a foundation of present-day honesty and mutual respect. It felt promising, real and deeply comforting. He hadn't gotten the paternity test. His love for Mark and Alex was unconditional, and the thought of potentially disrupting their lives and identities further felt unnecessary and potentially damaging. They were his sons, period. Olivia's infidelity, however extensive, didn't change the nearly 2 decades he had spent raising them, loving them, being their father. That bond was stronger than biology. He thought about the societal pressure he had faced, the voices urging him to forgive, to prioritize the institution of marriage over his own well-being. He understood the sentiment, the value placed on longevity and stability. But he also knew with absolute certainty that staying in a marriage built on such fundamental deceit, especially when the deceit was compounded by a lack of genuine accountability and recent boundary crossing, would have eroded his soul. It would have meant living a lie, day after day, with someone he could no longer trust. That wasn't a life he wanted for himself, and ultimately, it wasn't a healthy model for his sons. His new life wasn't perfect. There were still moments of loneliness. The adjustment to being single after so many years was a process, and co-parenting had its challenges. But the pervasive sense of dread and confusion that had defined the initial period after the discovery was gone. He felt lighter, more authentic, more at peace. He was grateful for the discovery, however painful it had been. It had shattered his illusions, yes, but it had also set him free. Free from a life built on a lie, free from the corrosive effects of gaslighting, free to build a future based on truth and integrity. One evening, sitting on his patio, watching the sunset over the Olympic Mountains, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for Sarah, for Dr. Ramirez, for his sons, for Chloe. Gratitude for the difficult lessons learned. Gratitude for the quiet strength he had found within himself. The journey of healing was ongoing, a continuous process of growth and self-discovery, but he was on the right path. He had faced the darkness, walked through the fire and emerged into the light. His life was different, smaller in some ways, but richer in authenticity. He was ready for whatever came next, ready to build, ready to connect, ready to live fully and honestly. The summer with the boys was good. Mark was home from college, working a summer job and spending time with friends, but they still managed to have family dinners and movie nights. Alex finished high school, a milestone that felt significant, marking his transition to adulthood and the next phase of their family's life. Ethan helped him navigate college applications, campus visits, virtual and in-person, and the general excitement and anxiety of leaving home. He and Olivia attended Alex's graduation ceremony separately, sitting on opposite sides of the aisle. They exchanged polite nods, a silent acknowledgement of their shared history and their current reality. It was a public performance of their new dynamic, civil, separate, united only in their pride for their son. As Alex prepared to leave for college in the fall, the dynamics shifted again. Ethan helped him pack, shop for dorm essentials, and prepare for the transition. He felt a bittersweet mix of pride in his son's independence and a pang of wistfulness at the thought of the house being quieter. Mark would be back at his college, and Alex would be starting his own journey. He talked to Alex about his relationship with Olivia. "Your mom loves you very much, Alex," Ethan said one evening, sitting on the floor of Alex's almost packed bedroom. "This divorce was hard on everyone, and things have been complicated. But she's your mom. Keep the lines open. It's okay to talk to her about how you're feeling or just about your day. She wants to be there for you." Alex nodded. "Yeah, I know, Dad. We're talking more. It's getting better." It was a relief to hear. The strained relationship had weighed on Ethan, and he genuinely hoped they could rebuild their bond. His relationship with Chloe was progressing slowly and naturally. They enjoyed spending time together, sharing stories, laughing. He found himself opening up to her in ways he hadn't expected, sharing more about his past and the impact of the divorce. Her empathy and non-judgmental listening were incredibly healing. He wasn't rushing into anything serious, but the potential for a deep, meaningful connection was there, built on a foundation of mutual respect and transparency. It felt like a gift he hadn't thought he would receive. He continued his therapy sessions, now less about processing the initial trauma and more about navigating the transition to a new phase of life. Single, with adult sons launching into their own futures. Dr. Ramirez helped him explore his identity beyond being a husband and a father of children living at home. It was a period of redefining himself, discovering new aspects of his personality and interests that had been dormant during the long years of marriage and family life. The woodworking projects in his shop became more ambitious. He was building a large bookshelf for his living room, a solid piece of furniture that would hold his books and photos, the tangible records of his life. Each cut, each joint, each piece of wood felt like a deliberate act of creation, a physical manifestation of the rebuilding happening within him. He thought about the future. Travel, maybe. More time for hobbies, deeper connections with friends and family, and potentially a future with Chloe. It was a future he hadn't envisioned a year ago, a future that had emerged from the ashes of his old life. It wasn't the future he had planned, but it was a future he was actively building, piece by piece, based on the values he now held most dear: honesty, integrity, and authenticity. The pain of the betrayal was still a part of him, a scar that reminded him of where he had been. But it no longer defined him. He had integrated it into his story, learned from it, and used it as a catalyst for growth. He was no longer the man living a lie. He was the man who had chosen truth, however difficult. He remembered the feeling of being utterly lost, of doubting his own sanity, standing alone against the tide of gaslighting and external pressure. He had found his footing, piece by piece, by trusting himself, by seeking support from those who offered genuine validation, and by holding firm to his values. As Alex's departure date for college drew nearer, Ethan felt a mix of emotions. Sadness at the impending quietness of his home, pride in his son's independence, and a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had navigated the most challenging period of his life, protected his sons as best he could, and emerged with his integrity intact. The house felt calm. The Seattle light, even on a cloudy day, filtered softly through the windows. The air smelled faintly of sawdust from his workshop. This was his space, his life, built on a solid foundation. He had faced the betrayal, survived the storm, and found his way to a place of peace. The journey had been long and arduous, but he had made it. He was whole again, or perhaps, for the first time, truly himself. He looked at the half-finished bookshelf, the solid wood waiting to be shaped and joined. There was work still to be done, but the structure was sound. He smiled. He was ready. Ethan drove him down to the university town, helped him move into his dorm room, and spent the afternoon helping him get settled. Saying goodbye was tough, a poignant reminder of the passage of time and the changing shape of their family. Alex hugged him tightly. "Thanks, Dad," he said, his voice a little thick. "For everything. For being you." Ethan hugged him back, holding on for a moment longer. "Anytime, son. I'm always here for you. Call me whenever you need anything. Or just to talk." Driving back to Seattle, the car felt empty. The quiet was different from the quiet he had sought after leaving the old house. This was the quiet of a new phase, the quiet of sons growing up and starting their own lives. It was a natural progression, bittersweet, but right. He stopped by Sarah's place on the way back, needing a friendly face. They had dinner, and he talked about dropping